Hey everyone, hope this video is helpful for some Pro Tools users out there that want to start doing more electronic-based production, specifically drum programming in Pro Tools. There's a few different ways you can go about doing this. For a while, I was mostly just placing audio samples onto the grid, and this has some aspect to that. It's sort of like probably the fine-tune later part of the process. But I wanted to figure out a way to find some sort of balance of being able to sort of play with some rhythms on the fly a little bit more quick and fun. But it sort of required me to set up this template, which took a little bit of time. But now that it's set up, it should be pretty painless. Basically, what I wanted to do was sequence my Trigger to Steven Slate Trigger 2 drums, and I figured out how to do that through another video via a MIDI track. Basically, you send a MIDI channel, the same channel, to all these drums that you want. So I picked channel 1, and then from there, you go into each individual drum track, into the settings, and you select the MIDI note that you want. And I'll just show you really quick. So here's all my drum tracks. You just go in. So my kick, make sure it's on channel 1, and then it corresponds, to the first MIDI note that you want. Make sure MIDI in is selected, and then from the MIDI editor, you should be able to sequence all of these drums. So that's cool. I was playing around with that a little bit, and I'm not super used to using the MIDI editor, so something I'm still kind of getting used to. And it's not like as fun of a process. So I started playing around with this new plugin they have called Groove Cell, and it's a sequencer pad-based drum sampler. And what I tried to do was make each pad or each part of the drum kit the same MIDI note as what I'm triggering in my Steven Slate triggers. I'm maybe using a couple of the same samples, but for the most part, I'm just sort of naming and designating each pad to a part of the kit. So, kick, whatever, hat. These will have the same MIDI note. D1 will be the same as my closed hat on the Steven Slate trigger. So this is sort of just like a very bare bones drum kit that I can load up via the sequencer. It has velocity, pitch. I mean, again, if you're used to Ableton, this is like really basic, but Pro Tools is pretty behind when it comes to this aspect of production. So I'll just give you solo that. Okay. So essentially kind of made like a 909 with 909 and a 707 mixed together, basically, just as like a starting point. And this just kind of allows me to program the drums a little bit quicker than drawing in MIDI notes or like placing audio onto the grid. Either of those two things also do the same thing and work, but this is like a little bit more fun to play with. And you can also play with like velocity, and again, you can do that in the MIDI editor as well. But I find the MIDI editor, you have to open it up and sort of like expand it and I'm still not super versed in it, so it can get a little confusing. But I mean, if you just need to do basic stuff, it's fine. But anyway, this is a little bit more fun, a little bit easier, a little bit quicker. And the cool thing about it is when you just have, so you have this blank canvas kit. I renamed all my drums so they pretty much correspond to what I have here with like the triggers on each drum, and then and the MIDI notes as well. And then if I like this sequence, you basically just hit export MIDI, and then once it switches the name to MIDI, you can just grab that MIDI file and throw it on to your track. So I already did it here, as you can see, just looped it. And yeah, so basically just took the MIDI information, not the drum sounds or anything. It's just sort of a blank canvas. But the drums are all going to be sequenced at the same time as all of these. So if I put a kick, in this one, it's gonna correspond to these trigger drums, at least from like a sequence standpoint. And I can change the samples if I want. Like if I want my clap to be a weird snare or like a weird percussion sound, I can do that, just via the trigger plugin. So if I mute the Groove Cell plugin now that I have the MIDI data from that, if I just hit play, it will sequence all of these channels via MIDI. So yeah, I mean, obviously a little bit more impressive sounding than these guys. So yeah, and then from there I can adjust per song, not only the arrangement, the sequencing, the patterns, but the sounds as well. If I want a different kick or whatever, I can just kind of go in and choose from some stuff I've already loaded or go into my folder. So that's really cool. But then I realized, well, when I play this, it's just sequencing the trigger plugins via MIDI. It's not actually like recording the audio. Oops, sorry. Let me just mute the Groove Cell. So like you can see that the signal's hitting the fader, but it's just playing. It's just playback. So that is not a great permanent solution. So in order to, I mean, I guess you could potentially just make your track as is, and then if you need to change the arrangement of the sounds, you could just do it through the MIDI editor. But I think what most people do when they're working in Ableton, or, it kind of just makes sense to make sure you have the actual audio tracks of this stuff, because, in how many years when maybe this, maybe, I don't know, maybe you lost these samples or this plugin doesn't work or something, you can still have your track and you can get a little bit more fine-tuned with the audio editing of it as well. So what I did is I copied all of these tracks to new audio tracks, and on each individual track, I have a bus. So I have like my kick 1 is going to a bus, my kick 2 is going to a bus, et cetera, et cetera. That gets then recorded into this whole bank of tracks. So basically, if I just want to kind of hear what's going on in the drums, I just have these muted, and the MIDI will play these through. And then if I want to record this stuff, I think there might be a little bit of latency when you just want to record say, let's just say we record like 2 bars. Oh, it looks like I already recorded this, but let me just do it over. Well, whatever. I'll just do it from the start here. Oh, put these and record. Okay. I'll just keep them muted so that we don't hear any double drums, essentially. So right now we're still just hearing the live triggers right now via MIDI. This is playing these. Okay, let's stop that. And now I can mute these, unmute these, and we can now hear our audio back. Now, you might be able to notice that they sound a little bit different. The reason for that is now what I did is originally I had all my extra processing plugins on here. You could do it that way. You could record all of these channels with the audio processing, and then when you record in here, they're basically flat, and you're basically working with an already processed signal. I was thinking that it would probably be smarter to just keep all my audio processing on these new audio tracks because, for any reason I don't like what's going on. And again, this is just a template, so I'm going to want to change it every single track that I make. I think it makes sense to just have the audio on these new tracks. So yeah, that's a little bit of like extra processing going on. Like you could hear like the ride was a little bit different because I got some sort of granular thing on there. But so yeah, I mean, doing it and figuring it out, it definitely feels like a lot. I've seen a lot of Ableton producers sort of do a really similar thing because they're using a lot of virtual instruments to make the sounds, and then they often want to record onto a new track and do the audio. A lot of times I see people doing that one at a time, like one kick, then your hi-hat, and then et cetera, et cetera. This is really cool because it's all set up to basically record all of the drums in one go. And for me, like basically the way I'm kind of doing it is I'm recording not only all my drums, but I'm recording sort of like the busiest or the most full the arrangement will ever be on the drums. Sort of like, when you make a mix template, for example, you want to have all the possible buses and effects and stuff that you might ever need. And then you just don't import what you don't need if the song doesn't need it. But you're basically always just kind of covered. So that's kind of how I'm like looking at this. It's not only am I, recording all these drum sounds, but I also, I'm recording as full of a drum arrangement as I probably will ever need. And at that point, it's really just composition of like what I want to take out, what I want to bring in. And, some of these I might not even use in a particular track, but it's all kind of there. So I can basically build up my arrangement starting from like 100%. And then I just kind of know like that's as busy as the drums probably will ever get, most likely. But I have it, I have them all on the grid. So if I decide to make this a little bit different or busy it up even more, I can. So basically, yeah, the 3 or so main steps was making the trigger tracks. So essentially your kind of big drum machine here, making a MIDI track and making sure that all the MIDI notes are getting routed to all these individual drums. Then, in my case, making an instrument track and playing with Groove Cell to just do a really quick and fun arrangement. But prior to that, I did have to kind of make sure that my MIDI notes correspond with what I got here, just so it kind of makes sense with when you go to the sequencer and you're like, okay, that's, that's a kick. So I also want this one to be the same channel. So yeah, and then once you kind of get a sequence you like, you can export it via, grab the MIDI, throw it onto the MIDI track, and then, if you want to go into the MIDI editor and fine tune that, you can. I'm just kind of doing like a working from backwards kind of logic here where I'm just putting everything I want, and I'll just remove things as I go, maybe start with a couple elements, bring more in, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last step was just routing, basically copying all of these as duplicates, removing all the processing. In my case, I decided to move all the processing on the trigger tracks, and then on the new audio tracks, I have all the processing, and I have separate routing buses that are coming from the trigger tracks to the new audio tracks. And so when I'm just kind of like basically starting from scratch on a track and I just want to like hear what's going on, play with the different samples, I'll just kind of stay in this world and have all this muted. But once I'm kind of digging all the sounds and I want to commit to that, then I just record into these new audio tracks. So yeah, it does seem pretty cumbersome, maybe compared to other pieces of software, but I think once you kind of have it set up, it's great. You have your template and you can just kind of go from there. The reason why I was kind of mainly doing this was because I was just having a lot of issues just using MIDI beat clock, which is the sort of like sending MIDI clock from Pro Tools out to my either like my drum machine or my sampler, and it was just so inconsistent. I could not, like, especially for overdubbing, it was just never shooting out clock at the same time, and so the audio coming back in was always different, and it's always been kind of a nightmare, and I've always had to sort of like line things up after. So I think this will be a process that will be, really have its benefits, and yeah, so and this obviously can apply to any sort of drum based or electronic based drum production in Pro Tools, whether you're doing hip hop or drum and bass or house or whatever, or if you just want like an 80s drum machine kind of vibe. Lots of flexibility as far as like arranging, a lot of flexibility as far as changing up the sounds, and yeah, I'm excited. So I figured I would just kind of share that with the world. All right, cheers.